I want to thank one of our incredible sponsors, BrainTap. You may have listened to our podcast with the founder of BrainTap, Patrick Porter. And if you did, you'll definitely want to get involved in BrainTap. And if you didn't, please, I strongly recommend that you go back and listen. It's so incredibly informative. Here's what BrainTap can do. You can literally build your brain fitness with BrainTap's mobile app and wearable headset. Everyone here at Outcomes the Sun podcast has had and continues to have positive results with BrainTap. Your brain is guided from awake and reactionary patterns to intuitive and creative responses. BrainTap is backed by neuroscience and research and was developed by Patrick Porter himself. BrainTap creates a symphony of brainwave activity to optimize your brain's potential, restore your ability, balance your energy, and calm your brain. And listen, it is a game changer when it comes to sleep. This technology is truly a gift, and I am so incredibly grateful to be able to share it with you.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Outcomes the Sun podcast with my partner, Melissa Yamaguchi. And this week we have an incredible guest, a guest whom I wrote a foreword for his book and did a little video. Did I do a video? I'm not sure if I did a video, but I'll do a video just so you know. And he has the most amazing story. Our guest is Dr. Chris Smith. He's a radiologist. He's a doctor, and he lives in Florida now, but his story is so incredible because for our purposes, Chris, we talk about mental health on our show. We, anybody who's got a story, and frankly, I think everybody's got a story, but anybody who has a story as profound as yours is so incredible. So basically his book is called Homeless to Hopkins. So he was literally a kid homeless at some point, going to college, and was really, you were struggling. You were on the streets. Hello. And there's so many things about your story. I'd love for you to share with us a little bit about your journey and what your story entails in a nutshell, because it's a wonderful, wonderful book. And I strongly suggest you read it because it's so inspiring. Anyway, tell us a little bit about your story.
Okay, yeah. So I come from a big family. I'm originally from Utah. I was raised in Utah. And my parents kind of struggled quite a bit, especially my mother kind of struggled with some mental health issues. And growing up, it was always a challenge as far as like keeping a house over our heads. So by the time I was about 4 to the time I was 16, we moved at least 20 times. I actually can't even count the number of times that we moved. Sometimes we'd be in a house for like a week or 3 months or whatever. It's hard to know. And with that as well, my parents often struggled having basic needs such as food, electricity, and other things like that. So there are many times growing up, I'd come home and the power would be out on the house, like literally no power in the house. And so we had to figure out alternative ways to survive, basically. So when I was basically 10, 12 or so, to make it short, there was several months, like 3, 5 months, 6 months, we lived without electricity in my house. So that would entail us cooking food over a fireplace to eat, or warming our bath water in a pot over the fireplace, and doing these things to try to survive. And so when we did that, we'd have to share the water because I came from a big family. I'm the middle child. I'm the 6th out of 11 children. So with bath time, you always wanted to be the first person in the bath because you didn't want to have the dirty water afterwards. And so just to paint a little snapshot. So that's kind of my life growing up, is that was pretty much the routine. That was normal for us, not normal for everybody else in the world. And with that went a lot of other challenges like food, eating, things like that. So it was, and keeping a shelter over heads. When I was a kid, for that same time period, I actually slept kind of in a carport that was semi-finished. It was outside. And so in the winter, it got cold. My brother's goldfish actually froze in the tank one night because it was so cold. So that's the conditions we grew up in. And then everything kind of came to a head when I was 16, actually, just before my senior year of high school. That's when my family ultimately got evicted, and we spent the rest of the year moving from motel to motel or shelters or things like that the entire year. And that's the year I actually ended up sleeping in the car pretty much most of that year. So the car became kind of my bedroom, my house. And it was in Utah, so it's a little bit chilly. So, in the winter, my hair would...
I'm going to interrupt you only to say that I live in Idaho, and Utah's not that far away, and it gets cold. So when you say that you have no heat and you have no power and you're living in a car, let me tell you, people, this is no joke. This is no joke. Like, you really, this was suffering. Anyway, continue. I'm so sorry. I just was like, what? Because it's below zero.
Back when I had hair, lost my hair now, but back when I had hair, just a little joke, my hair would actually freeze to the door because it was get so cold at night. And so I would just basically crawl up in a little ball in a sleeping bag on the chair in the car, and that's where I would sleep at night. But then I would still have to go to school. So I would still get up and go to school as a senior. And the interesting thing was this dichotomy, because I still excelled in school, because all of this time, school and like libraries were my safe space. They're always my safe place, because the school never went anywhere. I always had electricity, and there was food at school. And so it was my safe space. So my senior year of high school, I would sleep in the truck, but then I would go be an honors student involved in extracurricular activities, such as I played football, I wrestled, and I was actually a class officer. I was the senior class secretary. I had honors classes. So I had this dichotomy of surviving. And actually, the other thing is I tried to hide it, because when you're in this situation, you have this fear. You're always afraid. And as far as mental health, fear was kind of a thing that I was raised with my entire life. Being afraid of everybody, the world is out to get you, kind of that mentality. It's what I was taught from my parents. They approach life as being a victim. And so I internalized that, and I was always afraid of everything. And at times I struggled with depression and anxiety. Mental health wise, when I was 12, I contemplated taking my own life. That's in the book, and I kind of talk a little bit about that. It's young for a child to do that, but when you're in that situation, you don't think logically, for number one, and plus you're a kid. And so I considered taking my life at 12. So anyway, that entire year when I was 17, I turned 17, I graduated high school, and we were still living in motels. And at that point, my father actually got arrested, and then my mother left to go up to Idaho, actually, with her aunt. And I was left on my own at 17. So at 17, I had to figure out what to do to even survive. So thankfully, I had an older sister. She was like my knight in shining armor. She basically saved me. So I was able to go and stay with her that senior year, and while I went to college. And so then I worked very hard in college, and that year I did too much. I was working 40 hours a week, and then I lost. Basically, I had a scholarship that I lost because I didn't keep my grades up, but I still had a 3.45. You had to have a 3.5 to keep your grades. And so I lost it by 0.05. I lost my scholarship. And so then at that point, I didn't know what to do. I was at a loss. So I decided I was going to leave, and I went and served on a mission. I was raised in the LDS church. And so I went and served as a missionary in Southern California, which in some really rough areas, kind of the barrios. I spoke Spanish. So I was in I don't know if Santa Ana, Anaheim, kind of those really kind of rough areas. Saw a couple drive-by shootings. We worked with gang members. But what that did, when I started to look outside of myself rather than focus on internally, is then I started to see the world in a different light. Mm-hmm. I started to see the good in the world, the good people that were in the world. We had many kind and wonderful people that, would give us food or dinner or things like that. And so I did that for 2 years. When I came back, my whole perspective on life was different, because rather than focus on myself, I started to look at others and see, I was connected in this world, that I was just a small part of a huge world of wonderful people that were actually out there. There was a lot of good in the world. Right. And that was probably a huge turning point for me in my life. And so then I got back, to make long story short, it's a long story, but I got back. I ran into my wife in college. We got married, and eventually I graduated college, applied to medical school, got in, and did well in medical school, worked very hard, and ended up at Johns Hopkins as a resident, and eventually ended up being faculty at Johns Hopkins in medicine. So I went from sleeping in the truck to being faculty at Johns Hopkins in about a time of 8 to 10 years or so, basically.
Wow.
So
Wow.
that's the synopsis. There's a lot more details. There's a lot more to it, but that's kind of the long short story.
The long short story. Well, and you touch on things that we talk about. I mean, you know, of course you were depressed. I got anxious hearing your story. I was like, I'm suffering from anxiety. I mean, the idea of being cold, this and that and the other thing, and not being able to keep your grades up. Of course, I mean, how hard is that? But I love this sort of transformation that you go through in Los Angeles, but instead of getting hardened and more cynical, you became like more open and loving about the world, seeing it from a different perspective. I think that's an extraordinary turning point, and really it says a lot about your character. I mean, wow. I mean, Melissa, don't you think it's just like, I don't know.
I was enraptured by the story, and there's a lot of questions I have. If I can ask him, Chris.
Sure, absolutely,
Chris.
Absolutely.
There's a couple of stories that you shared that led me to, as a mother, kind of, you know, I want to inquire about. One, you said that your little brother Sammy had passed, and you watched the toll that took on your mom, and how something maybe the lights dimmed a little bit. And you used a phrase that I haven't heard in a really long time. You said that your mother was a tinderbox, and I understand what that means. You know, easy to go off. And so I'm wondering, as a young child, as one of in this family, and these are all these tender little souls that are kind of like baby birds, right, looking to mom and dad to guide.
Yes,
and
exactly.
You talked about having an older sibling that really was your knight, you know, like your savior. I'm wondering, at that time, obviously you're too little, and as little children, we don't know when mom or dad or our caregivers are maybe unstable in some area. We don't know, because we have no point of reference. That's it. My question is, at that time when your mother, and I know you described some issues about your dad, and I'd like to talk to you about your dad in a moment. With your mother, where did you find the strength? Was it from your siblings in learning how to navigate and tiptoe around mom when she was going through this really hard time, and throughout your life with your mom? Was it how did you learn to navigate that as a child?
That's a very good question. My older sister, she's about 10 years older than me. Mm-hmm. When my mother was really struggling, my older sister kind of took up like a surrogate motherhood. Like, she really helped us and took care of us. Like, she would take us places. And one place that was a refuge for me was a library. So my sister would take us to the library. And in the library, you asked about finding the direction. So I read about these stories in books of people who overcame these amazing difficulties, and they became kind of like my friends and my idols. For example, I'd read about Abraham Lincoln living in a log cabin and growing up and becoming the president of the United States.
Right.
Or I loved the Lord of the Rings and Tolkien, and I loved reading these people who overcame insurmountable odds to see this future. And that kind of gave me a purpose, a direction to say, you know, life's not very good now, but I can choose to change that and make it become what I want it to be.
I love that.
I love, you know, there's that beautiful Buddhist quote that pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. And I love that.
That's a great quote.
There's one other thing I wanted to ask is you have, you mentioned in there about your dad, like in whatever shortcomings he may have had, you said that your dad always was involved or pushing you towards sports. And I know, speaking from my own personal experience with my husband is severely dyslexic and really struggled in school, and found that his one area of safe haven was sports. And he excelled in sports and became all European MVP, and playing basketball. He went to the little league, I never get this right, but the little championship thing for baseball players in one of the Carolinas. So he was a really excellent athlete, because that's where he found he could excel. And he said outside of that, he was shaking in his boots when it came to reading class or have to do something. So sports was always his safe haven. And to this day, at our age, he still will sit with a big smile on his face and watching any kind of sports event on TV you can see it takes him straight back. So kudos to your dad for having that wherewithal from wherever it came to know that get these kids involved in sports. Did you find that sports, and I'm right there with you on libraries being a safe haven. I've always loved libraries. I feel obviously that I got my own little library here.
Yeah, I can see the books.
I've always loved the books. But if did you find that in addition to the library and that escape, did you find that sports provided that sense of community? I know you talked about being an introvert and not really like at some point feeling uncomfortable with that, but did you find that sports did offer you a bit of a respite?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Sports, the kids I played with in sports became like a team, almost like a surrogate family. They didn't know everything I was going through, but they believed in me, and we shared this experience together. We were able to be connected together and develop almost like a brotherhood or, a family, like that we shared these things together. And absolutely, sports definitely. So I think sports can help anybody in that situation. And plus, it's, I think, from a mental health standpoint, that activity, physical activity, is extremely helpful to help you deal with the difficulties of struggling with some mental illness or whatever you have going on.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, we always talk about movement being so integral to finding mental balance, like just getting out and moving and also the camaraderie and the community of that, because I think you feeling isolated and being brought up with the idea of victimhood, because I found that really, I mean, wow. And that's a heavy burden when your parents sort of see themselves always. My mother was a little like that, but my father wasn't. So there was a little more balance, but that sense of being a victim, and you're always kind of trying to make that okay for them. You kind of want to make your parents feel better. I think that's when children sort of don't know their role becomes not a child. It becomes, how do I fix my parents? How do I make it okay? How can I, because you love them so much, right? And you don't know anything different. It's normal for you to have dirty bathwater. That's a bummer.
Yeah. And you're absolutely right. Because growing up, I wanted to try to figure out how to help my mother and my father. So I actually started working at a very early age. I started working, I think I was 8 years old, started picking fruit in the local orchard by our house. One of the farmers had some fruit there, and we'd work in the summer picking fruit. And we mainly gave most of our money to our parents so then they could buy food or whatever. And so that trend continued. I started working full-time when I was 15 in high school as a dishwasher, and most of my paycheck I would give to my parents to help support my siblings, my younger siblings.
Right. Are you still close with your family?
Somewhat. I mean, our family kind of has this kind of fractured dynamic sometimes because...
Trust me, I understand.
Some of my siblings I am closer to. As far as the interesting about my siblings, actually, 6 of us actually went on to earn doctorate degrees. I don't know if I told you that. 6 of us went... So I have a brother who did a PhD from Harvard. He's actually a CEO of a biotech company now. My I have 2 siblings that are dentists. I have one as a pediatrician, another as a PhD from Penn. So
wow.
Something was in the bath
part
water.
of our thing was exactly.
Something was in the water. Yeah.
Something. So my family, some of my siblings I'm close to, some of them I'm not. Some of them still have not come to terms with what we went through, and they don't really talk about it. We actually don't really talk about it. My sister was here last week, and this is the first time in 30 years. She's another older sister. We actually sat down and talked about our lives growing up.
Wow.
Because they were so painful, you kind of lock them up, those emotions, and you don't deal with them. But you have to eventually open it up.
Absolutely, because, one of the things that I like to think, it's just, no, I don't have a PhD in this, but I certainly have a lot of experience. But I think that telling our story is so imperative to kind of opening up so that you can heal the trauma. Because otherwise it gets locked away somewhere, right? It comes out physically, it comes out whatever. It comes out in a mental state of anxiety or whatever. But when I think it was, I commend you for, tackling kind of addressing the story with your sister, because it's not easy. It's not easy when there's resistance from somebody in your family. That can be challenging, but it's so powerfully healing, because once it becomes a story, it no longer can, it's like, oh, wait, it's just a story. It's just something that happened in the past. It's no longer who I am. I don't have to define myself by that story anymore. But it's a good story, man.
Yeah, exactly. Once you own your story, it doesn't own you.
Yes.
Once you're able to own your story,
Yes.
then you own it.
Yep. That's
a lot of times when people
true.
are dealing with their past, they reinvent themselves so that what was, it can no longer be bridged to what is. And I understand how some people want to completely separate. But I think you've proven that in finding the peace with what was and realizing that it's not what is, that the bridge can stay there. Maybe you have a gate up so things don't fly back and forth as quickly. But I think there's something so healthy about that, right?
But, yeah, exactly. And I think also when you go back and you look at your past and you're able to share that with other people to lift them up, then it doesn't become such a weight on you. Then you actually use it to help others to overcome their own difficulties. In my book, I talk about scars. Like, we all have these scars, and we get scars by living. That's just life. Everybody goes through and you get scars, emotional scars, physical scars. And when you learn to kind of share your scars with somebody else to help build them up, those scars then become a strength to you and to them. Not necessarily a burden, but then it can be a strength to lift you up and lift them up as well.
100%. That's such a wonderful insight and it's a great imagery and analogy. Really, it's so good because it's true. Our scars make us strong. And I think Hemingway has a quote, something about that, but anyway, I'll find it. Hang on.
Yeah, he does, actually. When I was a kid, I don't know if I told you this, but actually Old Man and the Sea was actually one of my favorite books to read when I was a kid.
Oh, yeah.
In the library. I read Hemingway actually quite a bit. I read For Whom the Bell Tolls, and I found the Old Man and the Sea in the library when I was like third grade, I think. And I read them and I loved it. So
that's awesome.
Powerful.
I love that.
It's powerful.
That's cool. And now we know why you live in Florida, because you never want to be cold again.
Exactly. Plus the beach, the sun, it's great for your mental health.
Oh my God. It's amazing. Yeah. I was just in California. I'm back in Idaho, and it's beautiful. It's not, snowing today, but it's below zero. So it was kind of a adjustment. I was like, all right, but yeah. So yeah. I certainly understand that aspect too. Melissa, do you have any more questions?
Please carry on for a moment, because now that I've been given permission, I'm going to look up I screenshot some of your pages that I wanted to ask you about. So please.
The thing that I was thinking about when you were talking and talking about your siblings, like everybody has achieved, and it seems to me that they have achieved, it's kind of like, and if they're not willing to kind of come to terms with their upbringing, and maybe there's still the generation where there's some shame involved in growing up not perfect, right? When we don't, when we think, gosh, I wish I could say that it was just, all sunny and roses and that I didn't sleep in the car and blah, blah, blah. But it seems like that they've sort of gone, I will be successful. I will put this all behind. I'm not going to look at it, but I'm going to trudge, I'm just going to go headlong so that I can create something. It's almost like a proof of life, proof of existence, proof of I don't know. It's powerful. It's them not wanting to talk about it is a powerful statement. I don't think it's good or bad. I don't judge them for it. I understand the pain involved in addressing kind of trauma, and sometimes it's just too scary to look at, in your mind. But what I know from trauma is that when you do address it, it's never scary once it comes out. Like once it starts coming out, you go, oh, wait, this is freedom.
Yeah, it doesn't hurt as much as you think it will hurt when you bring it up. I actually went to, part of what I did in this process is I actually went to therapy for a couple of years. I find it's helpful for, if anybody's struggling, they should get some help with a professional therapist or something to work through some of these issues, because just talking about them and getting them out, like you said, brings clarity and release, freedom. It gives you freedom from those issues. They don't own you. You can just let them in the past and leave it in the past. It's part of what you went through. It wasn't necessarily fun, but it's in the past.
Right.
It's gone. You can leave it back there.
Yes.
You had a professor that stated something. I screenshot it because I love this quote. And he said to you were talking about the imposter syndrome. And I have a son who's a junior in college, and he has taken some classes and talked to me about this imposter syndrome, that a lot of the kids the professor was relating to the imposter syndrome to today's age of kids who are just inundated with social media and imagery of perhaps what is 80%, designer set stages and not reality. Yeah. And so when you think about this imposter syndrome that you said, your professor said, who doesn't suffer from imposter syndrome? And it's the imposters themselves. They don't suffer from it because they're not aware they have it. And the rest of us who are trying our damnedest to make sure that we're doing the right thing and that we don't get called out and that maybe it's not enough are the overwhelming majority. And I think that whole line, the minute I read that, it made me think about my son and his generation and how they've got this constant pressure with social media and how this image that they believe that they have to match that's not real. And so this imposter syndrome has been thrust upon our generation of kids in middle school, high school and on into university in a way that I wonder how we help them, aside from encouraging them to not be afraid of their stories, how we encourage them to move forward. And I realized that it's all relative to our time, right? So you're younger than I am, but at our generation, when we were going through this, you said something that brought tears to my eyes, and you said when you were playing sports, your teammates weren't aware of what all you were going through, but they believed in you. And sometimes that's all it takes is for someone to believe. Oh, it makes my eyes water up even talking about it. For someone to believe in you. It seems like such a small task. And that's enough to propel you. And I think that this whole notion of our youth, if we would just, perhaps the greatest lesson that I learned from you in your book, aside from your amazing resiliency and your drive and your belief that there was something better to come, is this notion that if we believe in someone, just the person next to us, the person, if we express that belief in the other person, sometimes that's enough fuel for their rocket to take off.
Absolutely. One of my teachers, my 11th grade teacher, my history teacher, Mrs. Thompson, she did that for me. When I was 11th grade, I had AP history, and my rebellion was a little pathetic, I know, but basically my rebellion as a teenager was I stopped turning in my assignments in AP history. I know it's pretty sad rebellion, but
it's still there.
It's still there. So I stopped. And she noticed this. So one day she pulled me aside and said, "Hey, Chris, what's going on? This is not like you. You're not turning in your stuff." And so I lied and said, "I don't know. I don't get this." And she called me on it. She said, "That's a bunch of horse manure, basically." And she said, "You're one of the most brilliant students in this class. I don't know what's going on, but you're better than this. You can do better than this. I believe in you." And when she told me that, it really took me to heart that, somebody believed in me that I could do something. And this school teacher, Mrs. Thompson, she changed the direct trajectory I was heading in at that time. She completely changed just that one sentence, this one teacher. And I think teachers in school and leaders can do that for our
Yes.
kids, just believing in those kids and giving them hope, giving them that hope that they can do things, can change generations, not just, lives, but generations of people.
Absolutely. You're absolutely 100% correct. It really did. It takes that one person it takes one person to say something negative, but it also takes one person to say something positive and see you. To be seen is really the key. And that's probably what pulled you out of your anxiety and depression and suicidal tendency, was that, like, I feel, it's not the case for everybody, but I feel when people get seen in that world where you feel isolated and alone and scared and you're living in fear, but all of a sudden somebody shines light on you and sees you, it's like, it's magic. It really is. It's magic and so healthy. So I want to tell everybody who's listening that Dr. Chris Smith is a wonderful doctor, but he also has written this great book that I wrote the foreword to, called From Homeless to Hopkins. Correct? Yes.
Yeah.
And it's a wonderful book.
And thank you for writing the foreword, bud. Thank you very much for doing that. I really appreciate it. It was fabulous. You did a fabulous job. So
well, I did. Thank you. It really is. It's a wonderful book and so inspiring. And I think that everyone will take away something for themselves. And really, I don't know, your story just makes you realize, it's like, man, if you can do it, I can do it. And that's, any great story is that kind of inspiration, So we are blessed and grateful that you have come on the show, Chris. Thank you so very much. And
thank you for having me.
Yeah, I will be, pushing your book in other ways through Mindstir and other things. So thank you so much. And I hope we both get to meet you in person one day. It would be really wonderful.
Oh, that would be fabulous. Yes, I would love that. So
cool.
That'd be great.
If you ever come west, just let me know.
Okay.
You're muted, Melissa.
No wonder I wasn't getting any talk back. I said I think the three of us could probably sit and talk story for a long time with few breaks.
I know. It's
a lot of stories to share. Very inspiring.
Thank you so much.
Well, thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for coming to Out Comes the Sun podcast. We will see you next week. And thank you, Dr. Chris Smith. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us today on Out Comes the Sun. You can listen to our podcast on Spotify, on Apple, and on YouTube. And you can donate to the Mariel Hemingway Foundation at the marielhemingwayfoundation.org. And I want to spell Hemingway for you, HEMINGWAY.org. I only say that because a lot of people put 2 M's, and that just won't work. Also, if you're watching on YouTube, you can go to the donate button at the bottom and it will take you right to a link with the QR code. And if you go to marielhemingway.org, you can also press the donate button and be able to donate to the foundation, which is designed to help guide people towards finding the right solutions for their mental health issues. That is my goal. I'm just trying to raise money so I can come up with an app and a website that has all the information you could possibly want to know about mental health and where to go. But we are in the process of making that happen, and your donation means so much to us. So thank you so much, and we'll see you next week.